joining us today on Lattes with Leaders.
I'm Zainab.
And I'm Trisha. And we're excited for you to join us as we catch up over coffee with CEOs and executives from diverse backgrounds and industries.
We seek to discover what is unique about each leader and educate you guys on new and interesting topics. Our conversations seek to enlighten and inspire people from around the world to realize that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things.
I think that the people who succeed are the ones who are very clear on who they are, and they are authentically showing that to their audience.
Aliza Freud is the founder and CEO of SheSpeaks, the leading influencer marketing and media platform connecting brands with female consumers. Aliza and her team help brands like Prudential, Kraft, Coca-Cola, and others to create and amplify authentic influencer content. We speak to Aliza about all things influencers, from how to become one to how brands should leverage them as part of their marketing strategy. We start this episode with our learnings from the Pepsi ad with Kendall Jenner. Stay tuned.
The thing that strikes me really about influencers is there are a lot of them, and a lot of them are really well known, but they have a lot of mess ups. And the one that really came to my mind was the Kendall Jenner Pepsi campaign, and just how much she misjudged the way that was the situation was misread, and the way that I suppose Pepsi and Kendall thought that was going to be messaged out. And the way that it actually came across. I don't know if you have any thoughts, Aliza, on that.
The thing that brands have to think about, and Pepsi is certainly a big brand. They have done influencer before. They're not new to the space. But when you think about working with an influencer on your brand, it's not just about whether that influencer has a large following. And Kendall certainly does. She has a recognizable name. She has a recognizable face. She was the right generation, right? They were looking to engage her because she has that Gen Z audience that is so important for a brand like Pepsi. Those things were all checked, right, on your checklist. The thing that didn't work well there was the fact that they mismatched the message to it was almost like the brand was trying to place the product, use the influencer, Kendall in this case, to make the product more than it was, right? Like, oh, if you drink a Pepsi, you can get the police to suddenly get along with all these people who they weren't getting along with before. I mean, it was an overpromise and a mismatch of what the product does, and in terms of how the influencer was portraying it. And I think that's why that in that situation you had a backfire.
That's a bigger lesson to be learned with this example, is that influencers can be a strategy, but when it comes to actually using their influence, you have to think about the context, and you have to think about, well, what is the message that you're delivering? And will it actually resonate with the audience? And in this case, it wouldn't resonate with the audience, no matter what you did with Kendall Jenner in that particular ad.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah, what's quite interesting about it is other firms have obviously come in and taken on political issues before, around the time of the politics taking place. And the examples that spring to mind is like H&M in China, around like more recently, a lot of companies around the Russia-Ukraine crisis have pulled out of Russia. So there are brands that do I think respond to political situations, but I think it's in a very different context, isn't it? Like exiting a country because the country no longer follows the ethics that you've come to understand, and then versus like using it for selling your product.
Yes. And I agree with you. Those are two, I think in this instance, though, what Pepsi was trying to do was quite different. And that's why it just didn't work for them.
Yeah, exactly. And Aliza, I'd like to take a pause there just to welcome you to Lattes with Leaders. Thank you for joining us on the show, and we're so excited today to have you.
My pleasure. Great to be here.
Um, I wanted to start by just giving you some space to introduce yourself to our audience and for them to get to know a little bit more about you.
Well, sure. So I'm Aliza Freud. I'm the founder and CEO of SheSpeaks. We are a community of influencers and creators, and we have the opportunity, the great privilege of helping our community of creators and influencers monetize their following by connecting them with appropriate companies to create content on their behalf and amplify and distribute that content. You know, our mission has always been to build a stage for women and hand them the microphone, and that's what we do every day. That's what guides us. Really being able to have this vibrant community. We have 250,000 women who are part of She Speaks, and we have the great honor of being able to work with them, ask them what they think about all sorts of different topics, and engage with them on behalf of brands that are interested in accessing the audiences that those women have built.
Yeah, and I find this topic absolutely fascinating because there has been such an explosion of influencer marketing of late in the past decade or so. And it's become such a topic that even universities are starting to introduce courses on it. So, for example, I saw a couple of months ago, Duke University has introduced a course on basically how to be an influencer. Like, are there actually principles that one can apply to become an influencer?
The way you define someone who is currently an influencer, we think about that as someone who's built a social following and they have built a strong trust and good engagement with that audience. So you could be what's called a nano influencer, meaning you have less than 5,000 people in your audience, or you could be a mega celebrity influencer that has many millions of people who follow you. But really, the commonality is that you have built a following of people who want to understand what's happening with you, what you have to say, how your life is, and you have built some trust with them and they engage with you and your content. So that's really how we define an influencer. The people that I think do a good job, I'll just give you my perspective from working in this space for a lot of years and who succeeds. I think that the people who succeed are the ones who are very clear on who they are, and they are authentically showing that to their audience.
Absolutely. And I think that is a very important part of the equation to start with, right? Like you need to have a story to tell and you need to have a personal brand that resonates with an audience.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about that next step then, like building the audience and actually gaining a following, because that's also a very important part of being an influencer, right?
If somebody is interested in building their influence for a goal, a set goal, the thing that you have to do is consistently be posting, right? It's there is a consistency to it. There's no question. And then there also has to be value for your audience. There has to be something that you are posting that is resonating with that audience that they find valuable.
Prior, influencers would use their platform to set up a pretense that they actually engage with these products, and maybe they do, like, we never, I suppose we wouldn't know. And now I've seen a shift where influencers actually hashtag this is an ad, or
Mm-hmm.
hashtag ad.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you think? Like, I'm interested, I suppose, in that dynamic, because knowing that it's an ad almost turns you off wanting to buy the product, to an extent. And
Mm-hmm.
whereas prior, where that hashtag ad wasn't on there and you weren't you actually didn't know whether they're genuinely using it or whether and they love it, or whether they were sponsored, made you want to engage a little bit more?
Yeah. Well, I think it's okay. So the hashtag ad, the disclosure, we're talking right now about disclosure. In the US, it's called FTC compliance, because that is the regulatory group that regulates it here in the US. But overseas, this is in other parts of the world. There are similar bodies and organizations. It is now almost in most places that have lots of influencer marketing in Europe, in the US, and in places where there is a lot of influencer marketing, there are now regulations about disclosure. And you have to disclose if something is an ad, right? So if you're getting paid, and that can actually that can be you can have a backlash if you don't disclose it. So not to drag too much on the Kardashians, because I know we talked about Kendall a little bit earlier, but Kim Kardashian very famously stepped in this a little bit when she was pregnant with her, I believe her first child. She talked about a product that she said she used, that she was using, and she was being paid to endorse that product, and she did not disclose it. And she got into a lot of trouble for doing that. In fact, her audience really got upset that she didn't disclose that she had been paid to post about that product. So now in most places, as I said, there are disclosure rules. You have to disclose if it's an ad, and I think what that has done is the audience sort of follows. They know, okay, this is an ad. They've said it, but if you can make what that piece of content relevant to me as your audience member viewing it and explain to me why it makes my life better, easier, etc., then I am still going to engage with that piece of content.
Yeah, and I take two things from that conversation there. The first is the power of influence, right? Influencers have such a responsibility because they are so powerful in the sort of audience that follows them,
Mm-hmm.
because their audience really and truly believes in what they're saying and wants to and is influenced by the things that they say. So the second point I wanted to bring up is that almost poses a little bit more of an ethical obligation on the influencer to think, how do I do my craft in a responsible way?
These people who are creators and influencers, they have a relationship with their audience. And when I mean by that is they will post something and immediately they get a reaction from their audience because there's feedback, right? Their audience members can share their thoughts on what the person is posting. They can engage with them. And by virtue of that engagement, and that conversation, they are building a relationship with their audience. Smart influencers and creators recognize the value of that relationship. They care about the value in that relationship. And so for them, their number one audience, when they think about, okay, I have brands that want to pay me to do sponsored posts, but I have this audience that I have built of followers who listen to my content, who engage with me. Their priority, again, if they're a good influencer, a good creator, is going to be first and foremost on their relationship with their audience. And they will not jeopardize that for the brand because it's not worth it to them. Right? And one brand deal is not worth it to jeopardize that relationship that they've built with their audience. And I think that's something that's really important for people to understand about these audiences, that the followers that the influencer has created. They think of these their followers as community. It is, and because there's a dialogue and there's conversation going on all the time. So I just think it's an important thing to understand about how they operate, and then therefore their responsibility that they feel to their community.
And we see that a lot, right? The next stage of the influencer cycle is you build this audience and then you start to sell your own products to those. And we've seen that. We talked about the Kardashians.
Mm-hmm.
very much built that journey. And then Jeffree Star's another one that comes to mind. And I remember he released this makeup line, and the makeup line was infected, and had really, really terrible bacteria within all the makeup. And so there was a lot of backlash for him
Yeah.
from that. I don't know if you remember that, Aliza.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, that can be incredibly damaging for the influencer. And with these influencers, they are the brand, right? That's
mhm,
so there, it's the same. If you think about it, it's very similar to celebrities. They are the brand. The celebrity is the
mm,
brand. And so their fortunes kind of go up and down based on what's going on with them and the things that they engage with that in their personal lives, and the things that products that they might bring to market and that they stand behind, which is why it is so important to pressure test all of that and make sure that that what you're putting out is something that you can be proud of.
mm. And what strikes me about that as well is, how do they bounce back from that? Like, if you do have, if that trust breaks between you and your community, um, and I think this is something that psychologically must be quite damaging for the individual themselves. How do you actually come back from that?
You have to own it. You have to say, this is what happened. I am so sorry. This is what, what contributed to this going on. Here's what I'm going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again in the future. And then people do let go over time. That is what we have seen time and time again, is that over time, as long as the influencer and creator really take responsibility for what happened, so they're not further damaging their reputation, but take responsibility and talk to their audience about what happened, and then what they're going to do to ensure that that doesn't happen again. They can generally move forward from something like that.
And we've seen a lot of companies respond in the same way, I think. So a lot of startups now, when they have mishaps, they actually come to the press and they say, look, we hold our hands up, we made a mistake, we're going to correct it, and we're going to compensate um, our customers appropriately. And you
Yeah.
see that a lot now with newer companies, in their response to these hiccups. Less so still in the larger organizations, but I think they're slowly learning to be more transparent.
As you were talking, I was thinking of the recent example, and this being more about, thinking about a company that had some very public issues, and that, recently, I don't know if you've read about the CEO of Shopify. Shopify had to lay off about 10% of its
Yeah.
workforce, and their CEO, who is, just has done some really, really interesting things and talked publicly about things when other CEOs were not doing so. He came out and said, when the layoffs happened, he just came out and said four words: "I got this wrong." And it is unbelievable what that has done to help people and their current employees feel better about the company. He basically said, listen, we made some bets about what we thought the future was going to hold given what happened during COVID. I was wrong about that. And here's what we're going to do and to correct it. And it has made, from what I've been hearing and from the reporting on this, it has made their current employees, the ones who remain, the 90% who remain, feel much better about the company and their mission moving forward.
And Aliza, this isn't just a social media thing, right? So we all influence in various ways. And you mentioned it earlier, but for um, every good product we tell 2 to 3 people, every bad product we tell 10 people, and so all of us are influencing day to day at work, in our personal lives. And what do you think it takes for people to actually leverage some of the things that you're talking about that influencers do really well, and take that offline into, for example, their work lives?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, I think that there's similarity in it. It's basically that you are building a brand, right? An influencer is building their brand and they are clear on, okay, this is who I am and what I stand for. And then by virtue of that, I'm going to be sharing content. I'm going to be speaking to, I'm going to be known for these things. So if you are, let's say, somebody who works in an office and you and a company, you want to be known as the expert on a particular topic, then part of what you would do is very similar to what an influencer does on social media. You might cultivate get, basically get through a set of information that you think is useful for others to know about this topic that you have expertise on, and then you share that out. So you are a resource. You become known as like a go-to person for that particular topic.
What is your advice to companies that are working with influencers and want to find the right influencers for their particular brand?
That's a great question. And I think what it boils down to is first you have to find um, the influencer who has the right audience, right? So you know what your audience, you know the demographics, let's say, of your audience, who you're trying to reach. What you then want to do is you want to find an influencer first who has that audience. Don't focus on whether too much on whether the influencer themselves is your target audience, but it's really first and foremost about whether they have your audience in their followers, right, in their followership. And then once you have that, the next step, so that's step number one. Step number two is then to say, okay, well, can this person credibly and authentically weave my product or service into their content? Let's say, you find that you have an influencer who has your audience, but they don't ever, and it wouldn't make any sense for them to talk about your product because of what they typically talk about. That can be a very mismatched situation. So what you want to do is find the influencer with the right audience, one who can credibly weave your topic or message into their content and speak about it authentically with their audience. And then, the other element is you want to make sure you have an influencer who has good engagement with their audience. There could be, somebody can have a lot of followers, but they don't have strong engagement. So you want to look at for people also who have strong engagement with their audience, and that is something you can see on their posts alone just by looking. You can look at their last 9 posts and see what kind of engagement they have. So those are typically the things that we look at. Those are the starting point in terms of the 3 must-haves for any influencer or creator we choose to work with on behalf of a brand.
What is an example like of when it's worked well from your experience?
We do a lot of work with Fidelity, and they have a strong initiative to help educate women about investments. They've actually done a study that showed that over time, over a 10-year horizon, women actually outperform men in investments, which is probably surprising to most women, and maybe to men as well, because men think of themselves on the whole as probably great investors. But women have not historically had as much confidence in their investment abilities. So what Fidelity was trying to do was make sure that they were bringing resources to help build the confidence for women about investing and their financial security. And so they built a lot of tools around that, built a great community, and they wanted to start a conversation with women who they also knew, based on research that they'd done, that women would rather talk about anything. They'd rather talk about death than talk about money. That is from a study that is publicly available. And so with that, knowing that knowledge that women would rather talk about almost anything else than money, they knew that the way to that they felt like a way to engage women in the conversation would be to choose other women who could be conversation leaders and almost be like a gateway to having this conversation. So they ended up choosing influencers, not female influencers who were, let's say, financial advisors who had done or financial asset managers, or, who had done their own investing, let's say. They chose women who had the audience they were looking for and had already built credibility with that audience, but had them talk about a life events that they were going through. So somebody who was just recently engaged and getting married was looking to buy a home. She'd been talking with her audience about that. So it was very natural for her to start having a conversation with her audience and her followers about the value of investing and having a secure financial future. How do you think about the idea of buying a home, your first home? What does that entail? And so that became a conduit for this influencer's community to learn about what having a strong investment approach would lead to, which is, the ability to buy a home. So those are the conversations that we chose to have on Fidelity's behalf with these influencers. We picked people who could have those conversations authentically. They had some life event, they had something that they could credibly say, all right, this is what has allowed me, like, I will start a conversation with you about the importance of money because of this life event. And it was really successful. They were able, the Fidelity has talked publicly about the fact that they doubled the size of this community that they were building to engage with women with this content that they were creating. And it ended up being a very smart approach to a topic that had some hurdles, as I had mentioned at the top.
Thank you so much for sharing so much insightful knowledge with us on this topic, which I think definitely Trisha and I are very unknowledgeable about. So it's really interesting to be able to take away some of those tips and tricks on how to influence better, and how influencers actually use their audience to be able to cultivate rich communities of people, and share their journeys and experiences, as well as work commercially with organizations. And hopefully there's something that everyone can take away from this episode that they can implement in their own careers to become more influential in their own ways.
Yeah, I hope so. Well, my pleasure. Thank you again for having me on.
Don't forget to check out our more recent episodes where we connect with global female CEOs to explore how to make it to the top. Whether your ambition is to be an executive at a corporate, build a franchise, or pivot your traditional career, check us out. Be sure to give us a like or follow on LinkedIn, TikTok, or Instagram at Lattes With Leaders. Our mission is to hear the voices of women from around the world. So if you're an avid listener and want your voice heard through our platform, please reach out.